Welcome back to We All Scream, another true crime podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today we are covering the case of Martha Rendell. Sources used are Truth, Deadly Women, Season 4, Episode 13, the University of Western Australia, theguardian.com, ncbi.com, as well as the Goulburn Evening Post. So, was Martha really trying to nurse the children back to health, or was she slowly killing them off to have their father all to herself? This week's story takes us down under to Australia in the early 1900s to the southeastern state of Victoria. Thomas Morris was said to be very attached to Sarah Simmons and was determined to become her husband. But Thomas's father delayed the union a while, claiming he could do better than Sarah. He did, however, eventually allow the couple to marry, and they lived happily for a number of years. In total, Thomas and Sarah welcomed 9 children to their family. Sadly, one child did pass away at an early age. The downfall really started when the Morris family moved from Victoria to Adelaide. Thomas worked for a big contracting firm, and somewhere along the lines, he crossed paths with a hotel worker named Martha Rendell. Martha was born August 10, 1871 in Hope Valley, which is a suburb of Adelaide. Her family was poor, but she would have had to have some type of education due to an act that was passed in 1875 that required children between the ages of 7 and 13 to attend school. Martha didn't conform to social expectations for the time and was considered to have loose morals. At 16 years old, she left home, found work as a domestic servant, and would give birth to 3 children out of wedlock. Martha and Thomas started an affair that would last nearly 10 years before Thomas's wife Sarah found out. Rightfully so, Sarah was heartbroken and angry. It seemed the whole town knew of Thomas's actions well before she did. To escape the embarrassment and to save their marriage, she demanded a change, and Thomas agreed to make a move. In 1885, the Western Australian gold rush drew people to the booming frontier town of Perth, located in Western Australia. New railways and electric trams made traveling from town to town comfortable. The population of Perth tripled from 1891 to 1901. And in 1903, the Morris family planned the 1,700-mile trip out west to start anew. Thomas went first to find housing and work. Sarah and 6 of the kids, Elsie, Willie, Arthur, George, Annie, and Olive, followed shortly after. Their 2 older children remained in South Australia as they had already established jobs, and Elsie would make the trip to Perth but later would return back to Victoria for unknown reasons. Thomas found work as a carpenter and housing, and with Martha seemingly out of the way, Sarah could finally focus on raising her family. The kids went to school and Sarah began to make friends. The family seemed happy and the past was seemingly behind them. Thomas had other plans though, because according to some sources, he didn't take the trip to Perth alone. Martha had accompanied him, but other sources say she made the journey out west alone after the family had been there for some time. Either way, she left behind her 3 children to be with Thomas. Thomas rented Martha a room in East Perth, giving the landlord the names of Mr. and Mrs. Moore. When the landlord noticed Thomas didn't come home daily and would only show up sporadically, Martha would just explain that he had to go out of town for his work. Eventually, Sarah found out Martha also moved to Perth and was pissed. At one point, Thomas sent his family back to Adelaide, promising he would soon follow them. But he never left Perth to join them. If anything, the separation only bought him more time with Martha. He did, however, finally bring his family back to Perth when they figured out he had no actual plans to return to Adelaide. Friends and relatives begged Thomas to give Martha up for the sake of his family, and while he promised them he would, he was only pretending to do so because the affair continued. In early 1906, Sarah had enough. She and Thomas were in an argument which led to physical violence, causing Thomas to have the reason he had been looking for to kick her out of their home, claiming she was a drunk and an immoral person. In April of 1906, they were granted a separation. Divorce was rare, expensive, and was considered something respectable people did not do. Thomas was given custody of the 5 youngest children. He moved to a house on Robinson Street in East Perth with his children, and to their surprise, his mistress, Martha, came over for a cup of tea the first night and never left. The children were told she was a housekeeper, but they were also told to call her mother and obey her orders, which had to be confusing. At first, she was said to occupy the front room of the house by herself, but within 2 weeks, she and Thomas shared a bedroom. Sarah would occasionally see the children, but she stopped after hearing it only caused them more issues with Martha. The neighbors and even doctors believed Martha to be the mother of the children, so having Sarah lingering around might raise questions Martha was not willing to answer. Martha finally had what she thought she desired. Although she wasn't technically married to Thomas, people in the community assumed she was his wife, as well as the children's mother, and to her that was enough. But the grass wasn't as green as she thought it would be. Thomas worked a lot, leaving her alone to take care of the house and his 5 children. And he wasn't a rich man, so hiring a housekeeper or nanny was not in the budget. She lived in constant fear the truth about her sham of a marriage would be revealed, which made her hesitant to make friends. In April of 1907, a local doctor treated 4 of the Morris children, Olive, Annie, George, and Arthur, for diphtheria, which was a common and also deadly illness at the time that affects a person's nose and throat. It is spread through respiratory droplets or infected open sores and ulcers. It is a highly contagious bacterial disease that causes inflammation of the mucous membranes. Toxins produced by the bacteria kill healthy tissues in the respiratory system, which cause a tough grayish-white false membrane made up of dead cells to form in the area of infection, making it difficult to breathe and swallow. It can also cause heart and nerve damage. Today, diphtheria is fatal in 5 to 10% of cases. In the 1900s, that was not the case. Even the daughter of Queen Victoria, who was Princess Alice, and her young daughter Marie died of diphtheria in 1878, despite having top-of-the-line medical care. The family doctor, Dr. James Cuthbert, was called and gave the children diphtheria antitoxin and prescribed tinctures to relieve the children's sore throats. The doctor noted Martha had been devoutly nursing her children back to health. She would paint medication on the back of the children's throats in an effort to ease their pain, as prescribed by the doctor. Luckily, all 4 of the children seemed to make a full recovery, and Martha, having cared for them, also became sick as well, but she also recovered. In June of 1907, 9-year-old Annie Mae disobeyed an order from Martha, telling her she was not her mother. This made Martha so furious she beat Annie, but it didn't stop there. When Thomas came home from work, she was beaten by him as well and then sent to bed. A day or 2 later, Annie came home sick from school with a cough and a sore throat. The same doctor who treated the children in April was sought, and Annie was again diagnosed with diphtheria. Martha was again ordered by the doctor to paint Annie's throat with medication, and so she did. But the 9-year-old wasn't getting any better. She became bedridden and experienced convulsions, vomiting, and diarrhea. Unfortunately, Annie's little body couldn't take any more, and on July 28, 1907, she passed away. Her death certificate stated she had died from epilepsy and cardiac weakness. A short time later, in August of the same year, Olive, George, and Arthur were sick again, but this time with typhoid. Like diphtheria, typhoid was common and a killer of many in Western Australia. 2,000 people died of the disease during the 1890s epidemic. Olive's body was already weakened by diphtheria, and sadly, on October 10, 1907, she also passed away. Sometime after the death of the girls, the family took a trip to Bunbury, and everyone seemed healthy when they returned home. But not long after, in June of 1908, Arthur Joseph, who was 15 years old, became sick with vomiting, diarrhea, and an undiagnosed throat condition. Martha would swab the back of his throat with an antiseptic, which was a common home remedy of the day, but he continued to get worse. Even the medicine prescribed by Dr. Cuthbert also didn't work, and in October of 1908, he too passed away. In April of 1909, 14-year-old George and 17-year-old Willie ran away to their mothers after George came down with a sore throat. After seeing 3 of their siblings die while under the care of Martha, they didn't want to take any chances. Sarah applied for the custody of George to be transferred from Thomas to herself, and the transfer was approved. George and Willie told their mother stories about Martha's demeanor towards Annie, Olive, and Arthur while they were ill. They told her Martha would laugh at Annie and Arthur while they unsuccessfully attempted to get out of their beds, and that she once called over a neighbor and a delivery man to watch Arthur struggle to sit up. Willie then told her he was sent to purchase spirits of the salts by Martha on one occasion, and before Arthur died, Arthur had told him Martha made him gargle with spirits of the salts and drink a little of it. He told him that it burned his chest and caused his teeth to become loose and sore. George also said Martha had sent him to purchase spirits of the salts after the death of Annie, and then again a few days before the death of Olive. George also mentioned his tea occasionally had a bitter taste and it caused him to have a sore throat. He also claimed to hear his father say to Martha, I have only 2 left now. To which Martha replied, anyone would think I was the cause of that. And his father answered, you are. Although they told their mother many stories of questionable actions on Martha's part, it wasn't until Thomas stopped paying Sarah her weekly maintenance that she reached out to the police, which then opened an investigation on the children's deaths. On July 10, 1909, the bodies of Annie, Olive, and Arthur were exhumed for post-mortem autopsies. The government analysis, Mr. Mann, said it was impossible to search for hydrochloric acid due to the body's state of decomposition. He then searched for arsenic, which is foreign to the human body and always found in commercial spirits of the salts. But there were no traces of it. He said the results didn't prove a negative, stating the samples of spirits of the salts given to him, which were allegedly the ones used on the children, only contained a small percentage of arsenic, so small that they were remarkably pure for commercial spirits. Dr. Steele, a bacteriologist and pathologist, experimented on guinea pigs with spirits of the salts and found that swabbing their throats with spirits of the salts caused similar effects to those found during the autopsies, and that was enough to have Martha and Thomas both arrested. This evidence was brought before the coroner's inquest on August 10, 1909, and after a hearing that lasted several days, they had a verdict. Martha and Thomas were both charged with the willful murder of Arthur Morris. They concluded Arthur died from an irritant poison given to him by Martha, and Thomas had been an accessory to the act. The trial started on September 7, 1909. The Crown prosecutor presented the evidence from the coroner's inquest and described Martha as a wicked stepmother who abused and eventually murdered her stepchildren, who she saw as a burden. He then called witnesses. A next-door neighbor, Mrs. Carr, stated Arthur used to call to her when being treated by Martha and would say, "Murder, police, Mrs. Carr, she's murdering me." Carr then went on to tell the jury she would often see Martha standing over the boy doing something to him. Carr testified on one occasion Martha showed her a bottle with greenish-yellow liquid that she would apply to the boy's throat. When Carr smelled inside the bottle, she exclaimed, "Good God, you are not using this for that boy's throat. It's enough to kill a horse." Martha told her she was only following the doctor's orders. She also stated she witnessed Martha carrying Arthur outside and throwing him on a piece of lawn furniture, telling him to lay there and die. Carr was then asked to pick one bottle from a number of bottles containing medications, and she ended up picking the bottle that contained spirits of the salts. 3 witnesses testified they had sold spirits of the salts to members of the Morris family. The doctor who attended the sick children testified the illness had puzzled him enough to ask 3 other doctors on various occasions to look at the children, and they supposedly were all baffled. The 3 doctors who performed the autopsy on Arthur's body stated Martha had made them promise they would not remove any part of his body, and she would not let them look at his throat. She stayed in the room during the procedure and after a while told them they had done enough, ending the autopsy early. The doctors all 3 testified the signs they had observed pointed to death from irritant poisoning, and they had discussed going to the coroner, but concluded there was not significant reason to take such a drastic step. Another doctor told of times Martha came to see him seeking treatment for her sore throat, but the doctor felt it was self-induced and told her he thought she was making herself sick. When all witnesses were asked why they didn't report the incidents they had observed, they said they believed Martha was Thomas's wife and the children's mother. Had they known her real relationship to them, they might have acted differently. After a long 7-day trial, the jury found Martha guilty of the murder of Arthur, and Thomas was found not guilty. They did not believe Thomas knew what was going on. When Martha was asked if she had anything to say, she only said she was not guilty. The judge sentenced Martha to death by hanging, claiming she was a moral deformity and a human monster. Her sentence was taken to the Executive Council for reconsideration. They sat for several hours before they decided the evidence against Martha was too strong and the law had to take its course. On October 7, 1909, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Martha Rendell was hanged at the Fremantle prison for the murder of Arthur Morris. She was the first woman in Western Australia to be hanged in 38 years and also the last, making Martha Rendell one of the only 2 women executed in Australia during the 20th century. Martha denied using spirits of the salts on the children's throats, but in the late 1800s, it was still considered a treatment option for diphtheria. I found some information stating during the early stages of diphtheria, doctors would generally prescribe that the throat of a sick person be painted 3 to 4 times a day with nitrate silver using a brush. Should the disease continue to spread, a mouthwash of hydrochloric acid, which is also known as spirits of the salts, would be applied in similar fashion as the nitrate silver. The application of the hydrochloric acid was a much more painful experience, so it was suggested adding honey to the mixture to make it more tolerable for children. So, was it murder, or did the tragic deaths of the 3 Morris children need a finger pointed somewhere once the town found out Martha and Thomas were not actually married? What a better direction to point at than a home wrecker who posed as Mrs. Morris and as the children's mother? I'm not 100% sure she was guilty, but I'd love to hear what you think. And please like and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And remember to trust no one.